Straight ahead, bombshell ruling. Federal judges decide the state cannot use the new 2025 congressional districts redrawn and approved by Texas Republicans. We go in depth with reaction from Washington, Austin, and North Texas. Plus, what may have hurt Republicans in this case. It's decision week, according to Dallas Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett. She tells us what the key factor is on whether she will run for U.S. Senate. And investigations ordered. Governor Greg Abbott explains why he is calling for state and local authorities to probe Sharia courts and two groups that he has designated as foreign terrorist organizations. Good morning, I'm Jack Fink. Get your fix for Texas politics. Eye on Politics on CBS News Texas starts now. Hello and welcome to Eye on Politics, a busy Sunday morning before the Thanksgiving holiday weekend. And we begin with the redistricting showdown in Texas, which is now before the U.S. Supreme Court. On Friday night, Justice Samuel Alito granted the state's emergency application for an administrative stay. Attorney General Ken Paxton says this temporarily stops the injunction filed by two federal judges in Texas earlier last week that blocks the state from using its new congressional maps approved by Texas Republicans. Instead, the judges ordered the state to use the existing congressional maps drawn back in 2021. Republicans had hoped the new maps would give them 5 extra seats in Texas. The Supreme Court will review the lower court's decision. In his ruling, Judge Jeffrey Brown, a Trump appointee, said, quote, "Substantial evidence shows that Texas racially gerrymandered the 2025 map, which violates the Voting Rights Act of 1965. The judge also cited the U.S. Justice Department letter from July to Governor Abbott. Quote, "In the letter, DOJ threatened legal action if Texas didn't immediately dismantle and redraw these districts, a threat based entirely on their racial makeup." Notably, the DOJ letter targeted on majority non-white districts. Any mention of majority white Democrat districts, which DOJ presumably would have also targeted if its aims were partisan rather than racial, was conspicuously absent. This case not only made national headlines for this ruling, but also for the scathing dissent written by the third judge, Jerry Smith, who sits on the 5th U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals. He blasted Judge Brown for not giving him enough time to prepare his dissenting opinion, and he rejected Brown's conclusion. Smith said, quote, "The resulting dissent is far from a literary masterpiece. If, however, there were a Nobel Prize for fiction, Judge Brown's opinion would be a prime candidate." He goes on to say, quote, "The main winners from Judge Brown's opinion are George Soros and Gavin Newsom. The obvious losers are the people of Texas and the rule of law. It is unfair to the Texas voters who are having a map implemented by their duly elected legislature overturned by a self-aggrandizing, results-oriented court." Governor Greg Abbott condemned the majority ruling. He was in Frisco on Thursday afternoon for a campaign event, and I asked him about it. How confident are you that the Supreme Court is going to rule in the state's favor? And what is your reaction to the fact that the majority opinion, the ruling, said that Texas used racially gerrymandered these maps? And, you know, did the Justice Department letter actually hurt the state's case?
So understand this. There was zero evidence that any map drawing decision was made based upon race. The only people who were eligible to even be able to submit evidence on that were the members of the legislature whose intent was the only intent that mattered about what was contained in those maps. And to a person, everyone from the legislature who testified said race played no role whatsoever. It was all about politics, which is legal. Second, know this. The judge who wrote that opinion was just reversed last year by the Federal Court of Appeals in that judge's last decision about redistricting. He got that redistricting decision wrong. He got this one wrong also. Second, the senior judge on this panel, Judge Jerry Smith, a highly respected Federal Court of Appeals judge, he eviscerated Judge Brown for not only a bad opinion, but for bad ethics embedded in that opinion. I feel very confident the Supreme Court is going to take this case and once again overturn Judge Jeff Brown for a wrong ruling on redistricting.
We spoke with 3 other Republicans, including State Representative Katrina Pearson of Rockwall, who was on the House Redistricting Committee.
I think they're just misreading the motivation of the map. It sounded to me like, and this is 160 pages, it just came out, but it sounded to me like they were focused more on what the federal government was saying, not necessarily what the legislature actually did. And I think that's where people are getting lost in translation, because a number of times we said during the process, the way the legislature operates, I mean, we are the dictating authority on how elections are run in our state. We did not take that in consideration. We just simply redrew the maps based on political performance. And I believe the opinion even stated that political motivation was a part of this. But I think they just dug too far into that. And I think the Supreme Court will sort this out. There's no way to say and to accuse the legislature of drawing those maps for any other reasons when there's an entire floor debate that outlines the purposes in which we drew the lines.
My view is similar to Governor Abbott and Attorney General Paxton, who have criticized the decision because, in fact, race was not used to draw these lines. Only politics was used, which is the appropriate standard.
Quite simply, this is a partisan map that draws more Republican seats, and that's why we're going to win. That is why we're going to be victorious in this appeal before the Supreme Court.
Democratic members of Congress from North Texas are among those who celebrated the ruling.
I've always made it clear that this was racial, and I know that some people want to run away from the race element, but the law protects it. We know that our Constitution recognizes and protects it.
I totally agree with the court. You know, what the Republicans and Greg Abbott did in Texas to seeking to disenfranchise voters of color was egregious, and the court clearly agreed with that. This opinion is sharp, and it is clear, and it is concise that Greg Abbott and Texas Republicans clearly engaged in racial discrimination.
So Governor Abbott, as you may have seen, called the ruling erroneous and said that he is going to swiftly appeal directly to the U.S. Supreme Court. Your reaction to that?
The main author of this opinion was a Trump appointee and just eviscerates Greg Abbott. So I think Greg Abbott is being defensive and, you know, doing his political posturing.
Obviously, I'm very excited about the ruling, very relieved for the constituents that I represent that we're going to have their vote mean nothing, and they're going to be paired with voters in Parker County, going all the way past west of Parker into Abilene, which is, you know, just ridiculous. You know, I'm going to be, again, cautiously optimistic and watching what the Supreme Court says.
But it is a victory today, because it validates what the House Democrats and so many Texans have been saying about these hastily drawn maps. You know, it's very clear that they were drawn to disenfranchise, to harm the people of color, the voters of color. And that's exactly what the court recognized. They saw through this ruse by the Republican-led legislature. They used the information that they received against them to show that these maps were drawn to harm Black and brown voters.
And so let me ask you, because Governor Abbott did file an appeal with the U.S. Supreme Court, the state of Texas has. And so I wanted to get your reaction to that.
But let's remember, Texas is a majority-minority state. And so when you try to draw lines, rig the lines in your favor, you are going to disenfranchise voters of color. I'm not surprised that Abbott would do this, but let's be real. The fight is not over.
The timing of the ruling has been crucial, with the filing for the March 3rd primary already underway. On August 29th, Governor Abbott signed into law the redistricting bill after it passed in both the House and Senate. Then October 1st through the 10th, the 3-judge panel held a hearing on the maps after they were challenged by dozens of groups, including Democrats, LULAC, and the NAACP. On November 8th, the filing period began for candidates who are running in the March primary. 10 days later, on the 18th, last Tuesday, the majority ruling blocking the new maps came out. Congressional candidates who were waiting for that ruling so they knew which districts to run in before they filed have until December 8th to do so. And Texas Republicans have insisted they only considered partisan gains and not race as the motivating factor for drawing the new maps. But did the U.S. Justice Department's letter to Governor Abbott in July instructing them to dismantle 4 coalition districts undermine Republicans' argument? I spoke with Dr. Bill Criss, a legal and political historian, about this. Let me ask you, because the Republicans have said from the get-go that race was not a factor, partisanship was a factor, which is allowed while racial gerrymandering is not allowed. And I'm wondering, because if it was just partisan, why did the Justice Department then need to send this letter if President Trump wanted 5 new congressional seats, and he certainly told that to Republicans that he wanted them? Why not just go with that as opposed to this Justice Department letter?
This is a fascinating question, Jack, and the only answer that we can speculate about that, the only answer that I can come up with is that the people who decided to follow the instructions of that letter had 2 motivations. One would be to do precisely what President Trump asked them to do through his Justice Department. It's like, okay, this is what the president's asking for. This is what we're going to give him. And the second reason is I think there may have been some hesitancy among some of Texas's elected officials to just brazenly say, yeah, this is all about just trying to get an advantage for the Republicans in Congress. I think there was some reticence in certain circles about just coming out and saying that, which would have made what they did substantially more bulletproof than it was.
At least from the legal perspective.
Yes, I think what you have here is a tension between political considerations and legal considerations. So politically, I think there were several Republicans who must have made the calculation that this won't look good if it appears that all we're doing is just obeying the president to give him 4 or 5 additional congressional seats in Texas. That just looks too much like a power grab. We have this cover from the Department of Justice in the form of a letter that says, hey, this is legally required. You're not allowed to have these coalition majority districts. The law has changed, and now we've got to undo these coalition districts. And so that was kind of used as a justification for what the legislature did. And from the Republican perspective, it's unfortunate that they did that, because that's what ended up hanging them with respect to the entire process.
Democratic Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett says she's got a big decision to make before Thanksgiving on Thursday, whether to run for re-election in the 30th Congressional District or run statewide for U.S. Senate. She told me what it's going to take for her to jump into the Democratic primary for Senate and join State Representative James Tallarico of Austin and former Dallas Congressman Colin Allred.
I will tell you that I still have not made up my mind. Everyone thinks that I'm just holding a secret in, but our poll is in the field right now. We are supposed to get that polling back by the end of the week or early next week. I said I would decide by Thanksgiving. I will tell you that it weighs heavily on me that these lines are still in place. One of the reasons that I was so upset is because I knew that they were trying to minimize the power and the voices of the people. And this has never been about me. Ultimately, if that polling comes back and says that there's any Democrat that has a chance of winning in the way that I think we can win Texas, then I am going to support whoever that is. I am testing for the 2 other major candidates that are in this race, and I am going to be transparent and open up my polling, my internal polling that I spent a lot of money on. I'm going to open it up to them because this isn't about me. None of this should be about any individual. It would be really, really, really hard for me now, knowing that my district is still at least in its current configuration, and knowing that my district absolutely wants me to continue to represent them wholly. It would be really, really hard. But at the end of the day, if the numbers are strong, that I am our best shot, then it's bigger than my district. It's bigger than the state of Texas. This is about the country, because we know if we can change the Senate map in this country, then that's where we start to get wins.
But to be clear, your poll would have to show that you can win a general election for
Yes.
U.S. Senate, not just primary.
No, I'm not even really testing for primary, if I'm being perfectly honest. We've seen enough third-party polls to believe that we'll be okay in a primary. Obviously, I would run and run hard, but the trends are clear as it relates to a primary. I am most concerned about who is best suited in the general election and not running a general election and saying, oh, we're going to get all these Republicans to cross over. I don't believe in this mythical crossover. I believe that we need to engage people that have felt like neither party necessarily has ever been their voice, people that have felt like they have always been ignored. I think that this is more so about going to people that feel like they've never really had a voice or had somebody to see them. Our questioning is about, well, you're not planning on voting, but would you vote if this name was on the ballot, or if this name was on the ballot, or if this name was on the ballot? And if we can see a trend that actually makes sense, and we're seeing what we typically have not tested for when we ended up with the Trump phenomena, or even when we ended up with the Obama phenomena, they were able to both bring out people that historically did not vote. I think that's the only way that we win in Texas, is if we have a candidate that can add to the electorate. If the electorate remains the same electorate that we've had over the last 30 years, then I think we're going to end up with the same result.
Congressman Vesey says he will run for re-election in the 33rd Congressional District, and Congresswoman Johnson says she will run for re-election in the 32nd Congressional District. Coming up, Governor Abbott targets Sharia law in Texas and two organizations. We asked him why and have reaction when Eye on Politics on CBS News Texas returns. Welcome back to Eye on Politics. Governor Abbott is targeting CARE, the Council on American Islamic Relations, and the Muslim Brotherhood. Last week, he designated them both as foreign terrorist organizations. He also called for Texas DPS to launch criminal investigations into them. His action authorizes heightened enforcement and prohibits them from buying or acquiring land in Texas. As a result, CARE filed a federal lawsuit against the state. CARE is the largest Muslim civil rights and advocacy organization and said, quote, his publicity stunt masquerading as a proclamation has no basis in fact or law. By defaming a prominent American Muslim institution, debunked conspiracy theories, and made up quotes, Mr. Abbott has once again shown that his top priority is advancing anti-Muslim bigotry. Abbott also urged the Attorney General, Texas DPS, and the district attorneys and sheriffs in both Dallas and Collin counties to investigate Sharia courts. Another reporter and I asked the governor to explain what is behind all this.
CARE has a long history of ties and connections to terrorism, to Hamas. One of the founders of CARE in Texas is in prison for 65 years because of financing terrorism. Just 2 years ago, in the aftermath of the October 7th attack by Hamas on Israel, the executive director of CARE was praising that attack that killed Americans. There is a long-standing connection between CARE and terror.
What sparked this? What led up to all this? And what evidence is there, aside from what you just spoke about, that criminal activity is being done right now as we speak?
Well, so, Jack, this goes back a long time. It goes back to a law that I signed in 2017 that made clear in family court situations that Sharia law is not allowed in the state of Texas. Only Texas law and Texas courts decide cases and legal matters in our state, period. Second is we've been involved in the investigation of Epic City right near where we are right now. And that's been ongoing for several years and kind of came to fruition with the action that we took this year, announcing that there were 5 state agencies investigating Epic, making sure that they had created a compound that was going to be Muslim only. And that is religious discrimination, and that's not allowed in the state of Texas. And that's why they've never broken ground, never been able to move forward. And now, because the name Epic City is so tarnished, they changed their name to The Meadow. But know this, you can change your name, but you cannot change who you are, and we know that, and we will ensure that project never gets off the ground.
We will certainly stay on top of this story. Up next, will pasta be caught up in a new tariff tiff between the U.S. and Italy? When Eye on Politics comes right back. A new tiff over tariffs is boiling over between the U.S. and Italy, and it's over pasta. Sarah Jenkins explains in the brief.
After the White House exempted foods like coffee and beef from country-by-country tariffs, Italian pasta makers are bracing for a massive hit. The U.S. Commerce Department is considering a 107% tariff, more than doubling prices for imported pasta. It stems from what officials call a routine anti-dumping review, alleging some Italian producers sold pasta in the U.S. below market value. The potential tariff is huge. Italy exports over $4 billion of pasta a year, and the U.S. is its second largest market. Italian leaders are calling the proposed tariff unacceptable, warning it could crush small and mid-sized producers. If the tariff goes through, importers worry a simple box of Italian pasta could cost Americans up to $10, putting a staple on the dinner table potentially out of reach. A final decision is expected in January. For The Brief, I'm Sarah Jenkins.
Thank you, Sarah. And don't forget, you can watch all the full interviews from our show today on our CBS Texas YouTube page. And please hit the subscribe button while you're there. That's all for Eye on Politics today. I'm Jack Fink. I am listening, and we are listening to you at CBS News Texas. I am grateful to all of you for watching, and I wish you all a very happy Thanksgiving. I'll see you next Sunday.